It's my pleasure to welcome Negar Partaw to IU and to our lecture series. Before we start, I just want to mention a couple things. One is that the Center for the Study of the Middle East is funded primarily by a U.S. Department of Education grant, and we're grateful for their support. They ask that we collect feedback on our events. You will see a QR code before you. If you see it in your heart, you can respond to the QR code or to the survey following the event. We would appreciate your feedback. The other thing that I want to mention before we start is that the Interasian Uralic National Resource Center, who's the co-sponsor of today's event, is sponsoring an event next week on February 9th at 4 p.m. in this room, entitled Ancient Religion in Contemporary Context, Zoroastrian Minority in Modern Iran. So if you are visiting us today because of interest in Iran, you might also be interested in the talk next week. That will be presented by Dr. Paulina Nietzschial, and again, 4 p.m. February 9th in this room. That's enough of that. Leon and I were talking earlier about how to introduce her, and we thought we would say that we met in a chat room in the dark web, which isn't quite true. We were in fact introduced by one of our graduate students, Alexander Shepard, in 2021, and for a long time we knew each other only via Zoom. She was at that point at Massey University in New Zealand. She and I have organized a couple of conferences along with Alex Shepard on Shia studies, one in May of 2022 and the other more recently in right at the end of November, the beginning of December of 2023. And so thrilled to have her in person. It's great to have her. She is currently a visiting scholar at Sesame and a senior fellow with our center. She received her PhD from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand in 2012, following which she was faculty at Massey University, also in New Zealand. One of these days I will learn to spell Massey. It's Massey. In case any of you need to spell it, it's EY, not E. And so she has been at Massey from 2011. Let her down. She's an expert on security studies, both Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian. Has been closely involved with issues pertaining to human security, in both those regions, as well as working with the New Zealand Armed Forces and the Armed Forces of Brunei, the Sultan of Brunei, the Sultanate of Brunei. So I'm very pleased to have her here today to speak to us about the current situation in Iran, with particular focus on their neighbors to the north and east. And the title of Dr. Partaw's talk today is The Silk Road and Security, Unraveling Iran's Influence in the Region.
Thank you very much, Tom. And thank you for coming here in the winter afternoon. It's a pleasure to be in Indiana. I arrived in October and I will finish my visiting scholarship program by the end of March, but it goes so fast. I can't even remember when it just happened. So the reason that I would like to talk to you about this topic is in consultation with Carl, we thought that a lot of people talk about the western part of Iran and the focus on the Arab world and Israel and Turkey. And I thought that it is very interesting to have a look at how the Islamic Republic of Iran manages its affair in the eastern part of Iran. As you can see in my talk, I sometimes swap between Iran and the Islamic Republic. This is intentional. So part of this is that gradually and increasingly, in the last 10 years, past 44 years, but particularly in the last 10 years, there is a divergence between national interests and the interest of the people of Iran and the interest that the states follows for the interest of the state. So if you are familiar with Iranian politics, you hear quite often that they tell you that the existence and the survival of the regime is the most important and the paramount security objective of the state. So a lot of times I use between the two just to mention that every time we talk about the resources, the people, and the geography, I use the term Iran. Every time I refer to foreign policies, I use the term Islamic Republic. And I think that's intentional. I just wanted to reiterate that. Now, I call this topic Silk Road and security. I know many of you have been involved in the study Iran and the ancient time and the contemporary time. You know that this is nothing new. Iranians have been tradespeople for millenniums, have had a very long tradition of connections with different countries around the world, with the left neighbors as well as the right. So East and West and North and South has always been a matter of concern and interest for Iranians. But I want to talk particularly about this shift of foreign policy that happened. And I am hoping that we can enter into a conversation after that, and I will learn from you.
So you want to,
Yeah, I just want to, can I?
so that keyboard will,
No, I just want to maximize this one.
you look, this is what they see, not this.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, cool. No?
That didn't work. Try it again. There we go.
Okay. So, so a couple of major importance for this talk is to understanding Iran's position. So Iran ranks first in the world in terms of known oil and gas reserve together combined. And the oil it is seventh, and the gas is third, but the combined reserves it is first in the world. And it is the seventh in the world in the terms of the reservable and the different assets together. So in fact, it is sitting on about 7% of world's energy resources. This is a major importance because, as you know, we have not been separated or being independent from the fossil fuels, and this still dominates our politics as well as our international security and international relations. Now, the other point for Iran is that the territorial and strategic position of Iran. So as you can see in the map, Iran is in a very unique position where it connects the corridors of north to the south and east to west. So it is sitting in the region where it can connect Asia as a continent to Europe, and at the same time, it connects Russia to the open waters. Those of you who know about historical political ties between Iran and Russia knows that Russia has always had an interest in Iran, particularly because it opens its access to open water through the Persian Gulf and then through the Sea of Oman. Now, it also has access to a very large shores of both the Caspian Sea. So Iran practically has sovereignty over almost all of south portions or south borders of Caspian Sea. And it's the only country in the region around Persian Gulf that had access on both sides of the Strait of Hormuz. So it has access to the Persian Gulf and it has access to the Sea of Oman. Now, what happened, what is important strategically, is that during the 8 years of Iran and Iraq war, for example, when Iraq's refineries were bombarded, they couldn't actually move oil. But when Iran's refineries were bombarded, Iran's oil could be moved through land to the Sea of Oman and then shipped from there. So it gives them strategic advantages that other oil-producing countries in the region don't. Now, historically, Iran has had a land and sea orientated interests. So Iranians has always been sea merchants. During the Achaemenid time, the maritime was the biggest, the largest. In fact, the empire expanded through maritime excavations and expansions. So the land has always been a matter of concern. So the title of this talk is Silk Road, because Silk Road originally in the ancient time started around the shores of the Caspian Sea and then expanded to the east and the west of the region, which means that it connected China through Mongolia and then through the shores of the Caspian Sea to Turkey and, of course, Armenia. Now, Iran also enjoys an extensive cultural, linguistics, artistic connections with its northern neighbors as well as its eastern. I'm only focusing on that, of course, with the West as well, but it focus is now on that. So if you, for example, go to Tajikistan, you hear that how popular, for example, Iranian pop music is. And there are also really different types like miniatures, different paintings and artists and musics that they share. Now, the reason that I mentioned this is that it has always been in a strategic. So Iran uses these artistic works in the strategic leverage and connections with its neighbors. Now, okay, so the Islamic Republic also benefits this geopolitical, geostrategic, and I call it geocultural, because it's very stationed in the middle of different cultures and it has connections with all of them. So from the north, from the west, it is connected to Armenia. And of course, many of you know that it played a very important role in the discussions of Karabakh and the fight that was happening there. On the northeast, it is connected to Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. There are Turkmens living in Iran as the geographical border of Iran. So it has the advantage of using those Iranian Turkmens in order to create a better connection with Turkmenistan. And so is with Afghanistan. And of course, at the south with Pakistan. Now, so Asianization of foreign policy has always been a discourse in the Islamic Republic. So if you remember in 1978, when the Islamic Republic was taking shape and the revolution was taking shape, one of the major mottos of the revolution was that there was no East and no West, and Iran wanted to be independent. So they wanted to have an autonomous foreign policy. Now, saying that, if you look at the history and the outcome of what happens in the Islamic Republic and the Islamic Republic's foreign policy, they have always been closer to the East rather than to the West. So there is an anti-colonization, anti-imperialism narrative in the discourse of the revolution that made them much more separated from the West and connected them more closely to the East. And by East, you can also think about Eastern Bloc, which at the time was also dominated by Russia. Now, so this is my talk today is not specifically about this Asianization, which has always been a dominant discourse, but I am very interested in this pivot that Iran made and put a pressure on since 2005. Now, if you play basketball, you know, when you say pivot, it's not only that you kind of turn to the other side, but it means you turn your back to the other side. And that's what Iran did. So the reason I'm using the word pivot is because Iran completely turned its back to the West and started to look at China and Russia later on we'll talk, as the alternative for connection to the West. So why did it happen that originally it has roots on the negotiations and the difficulties and tensions between Iran and European countries, as well as Iran and the United States during the nuclear negotiations of 2005. So when there was a discussions that Iran is violating the Atomic Agency's regulations and they couldn't get into an agreement, Iran became the subject of more sanctions and embargoes. And that embargoes meant that rather than trying to negotiate those differences, Iran turned around and looked at the East. And it started to develop a much more closer connection with China, and then, as we see, with Russia. So there are a couple of reasons for that. One is, as we talked about, is about nuclear negotiations. The other one was that since end of 2001, beginning of 2002, American forces were in Afghanistan. They were now had a large military presence in the borders of Iraq. And then, of course, in 2005, they had a large presence in Iraq borders. So all of a sudden, Iran felt like it was sandwiched. So the Islamic Republic kind of thought that it was, and it needed to have a kind of alliances and a strategic connection with China and Russia in order to have a form or a series of containment policies around the American forces. And those of you who study Central Asia, you also know that the presence of the US forces in Afghanistan meant that they also were very present in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. They started to put forces. They used the airport bases and aerospace of those countries in order to be able to attack the Taliban, which meant that increased the worries of the Islamic Republic. Okay. So the focus of the strategic pivot that Iran made was to become closer to Russia and China and Southeast Asia and India particularly, and I will tell you why India is in the mix. But also when you read the discourses of earlier stage, like 2005, 2006, the Islamic Republic's documents quite talk about Venezuela and South America in the context of the East. But that doesn't mean that they were part of the East, but they believe that this becomes another alternative market for the Islamic Republic. So they were very interested in that. And I think many of you remember how Ahmadinejad and Hugo Chavez in Venezuela became really good friends and started talking about creating an alliance in the OPEC and in the oil producing countries in order to kind of manage or balance the price of oil in OPEC, which was dominated by Saudi Arabia. So now, in addition to these strategic interests, there were also some economic reasons. According to the reports by the International Monetary Fund, China owned about 28% of the economic growth of the world between 2013 to 2018. The report always suggests that collectively, China, in addition to South Asia and Southeast Asia, owned most of the market by 2024. So there was also a very, very strong determination to make sure that there is a market for the products. And when I say about Iranian products, it's not only about energy. Of course, energy consists most of it, but Iran also produces petrochemical produced, and they have steel mills. And we talk about some of the productions that they share with their eastern and northern neighbors. Now, okay, so why do they have to pivot? So there are four approaches from within the Islamic Republic's documents that tell you what is the benefit of this pivot. Now, the first group of them, so originally when it started in 2005, 2006, the discussion was that we create a symmetric balance between East and the West. So we start creating relations and ties with China and with India and with Russia. And then that means that the Western countries start to think about having a connection with us, so we can create a balance between West and East. And that's a historical strategy for Iran to survive. So it has positive security implication according to the state. So they believe that if they don't put all the eggs in one basket, it means that there is a much better chance of survival, particularly because the Islamic Republic believed at the time, it still does, but believed that the aim of the United States military forces in Afghanistan was partly a regime change in Iran, and they wanted to do everything in order to make sure that this change of regime doesn't happen. As this strategy grew, so in 2010 and 2011, the documents that the Islamic Republic produced would tell you that, well, actually, regionalism is very protective because at the time they needed vote in the United Nations for the nuclear program, and each country would be a vote. So they started lobbying with the smaller country and the larger country in order to say that they can get vote and get themselves out of the problems that they created. They actually even went to the Pacific and talked to small islands in the Pacific to make sure that they would vote for them because they needed those votes in the General Assembly. Southeast Asia became much more important during this time, not only because many of them are Muslim countries and Iran could have a connection with them through Islamic similarities, but also because they were votes and they knew that there was some anti-colonial, anti-imperialist ideological positions in the Southeast Asia that they could leverage in order to create a strategic alliances with them. Now, as we go through 2015 and 2016, after the signature of the JCPOA and the Comprehensive Action Plan for Nuclear Program, you can see that the discussions are changing a little bit. First of all, is that there is no trust in the Islamic Republic's documents about that agreement. They believe that Western countries would change their minds. And because when they change their minds, something else become an issue. So, for example, Khamenei had a speech, and in his speech said, today is a nuclear program, tomorrow is a human rights issues, they're never going to let us live, and the aim is regime change. So we have to, that trust have to be, we're not necessarily taken into account. So they believe that developing with relationship with the East could put pressure in the relationship with the West. So they're thinking about more of developing, pivoting. So you can see that pivot quite happen in 2015 and 2016 because they believed it is a way to kind of show their dissatisfaction with the way that West was treating Iran, well, the Islamic Republic at the time. But as we grow, so from 2017 onward to 2023, the discussions are moved now into an asymmetric relationship. So they believe that we just completely have to totally forget about the West and put all our baskets into the East. There are big markets in the East. The money is shifting to the East of the world and to Asia. So we should completely forget about the West, and that's never going to happen. This gained much more momentum after ex-President Trump withdrew from the deal, from the nuclear deal, and that was when the Islamic Republic was like, okay, this is never going to work. And every time that the government and administration in the United States changes, their policy towards the Islamic Republic change. So we really don't need to worry and spend a lot of time. All of a sudden, you can hear the discourse is changing, and the West is becoming, rather than a potential partner, is becoming an enemy that you cannot discuss or reconcile with. Now, the picture that you see here is the China's Belt and Road Initiative. And one of the reasons that I put this here is that during the time that we are talking about, like 2015 and 2016, China started to make much more of investment and has started to negotiate quite extensively in Asia about the Belt and Road Initiative. So there was a huge benefit for Iran, because if it goes through Iran, the volume of the exports that goes from China to Europe is exponential, and it is what Iran really needs and wants. It was also the way to go around sanctions, because you can't really tell China that you can't move your goods from one side to the other side. Plus that Iranians, well, the Islamic Republic knew that the dependency of Europe on Chinese market is increasing as well. So it's not only a one-side project. We will talk about this Belt and Road Initiative a little bit more during the talk. Now, I wanted to show you that how this pivot. So if you look at this picture tells you a little bit about how the pivot project have developed. So at the beginning until 2017, you can see that China was buying only 26% of Iran's oil, and there are Italy's buying Iran's oil. There are different countries who are buying west and east. And then if you look at the map of the 2023, you can see that China is buying over 95% of Iran's oil. So everybody else kind of backed. And they didn't want to have trade with Iran, and China kind of filled out that vacuum. Interestingly, if you read the recent reports, that we'll talk about it a little bit later, about the Houthis and the attacks that happened quite recently in the last week, you can see that one of the issues that United States was raising is that we don't know really how to target Iran's economy more than what it is. So we have targeted every aspect of Iran's economy, from aerospace, airplanes, military facilities, everything that you can imagine. So it is very hard to put other rounds of sanctions on Iran. You can extend it, but it is hard to target anything else. Now, we will talk a little bit more later about what is bad about this relationship for Iran. But what is interesting is that the Islamic Republic became more and more fascinated and more invested in its ties with China, right?
So that mouse will affect that screen idea.
Oh, okay.
So what do you need to do?
I just wanted to put it on this so I can change it. I can't change this one.
Okay, okay. There you go. Yeah.
I'm sorry, a lot of people, they want to be admitted to here, but Jamshid Choksi was one of them. Many people want to.
They've all been admitted.
They have been, okay.
Okay, so I made a chart, and we will have a look at them because I wanted to show you the expanse of the relationship that China now has with Iran. And the kind of, so in 2021, Iran and China signed a 25 years cooperation document. If you were looking at this cooperation document, you could see that there is a huge emphasis on security, military cooperations, economic cooperation, security, strategic cooperation, but also intelligence cooperation. There is the communication technology cooperation. So I bolded some of the issues like you can see political, strategic, and economic dimensions, which is interesting. So it means that gradually Iran is also putting its weight to bring China into a bloc. So they are trying to create a bloc that kind of counterbalances American dominance in Asia, but also American dominance, particularly in the Middle East. And it keeps Iran floating, yes? So the oil projects are very expensive. The participation, it's the creation of equipping of storage tanks. There are $700 million investment that is going to come from 25 years from China to Iran in building Chabahar, which is a port in the southern part of Iran, and it is very important because it is stationed very next to the Iran's national railroad. So Iran's national railroad connects Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, but also connects Afghanistan to Turkey in a way. And then it has all these little railways that goes to connects it to Armenia, to Tajikistan, to Turkmenistan, and all of these projects, small projects that you see, have been contracted either as joint ventures between Iran and Russia or between Iran and China. So they wanted everybody to get a part of it, just because in the Iranian political culture, you keep your friends very close, but you keep your enemies closer. So you have to constantly be close to them to know how it works. A lot of things don't change culturally in Iran, even if the systems and states change. Now, China has substantial investments in Iran's national gas export company, national oil company, all different port building companies, infrastructure, railroads, roads. So it is very embedded. And those of you who have studied law and know about his liberal theories, he believes that if you want to make sure that somebody is protecting you, make sure that they have a lot of money invested in your country, because if then you get hurt, they get hurt. So they will be protective of you because of their own interest rather than your interest separated from them. There's also the matter of technology. And we know that, for example, opposition in Iran constantly have been arguing that Iran buys surveillance equipment as well as communication technology equipment from China and South Korea, in fact, in order to suppress the dissidents. And this has been one of the issues that they do. Now, if it was in the West, there would be some ways to put that on the embargo, but because it is not in the West, it is easier for Iran to manage these forms of relationship. Now, the map that I put for you in this slide talks about the One Belt and One Road, but it talks about the members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the roads that they are suggesting to put in order for China's goods to get to Europe and India's goods to get to Europe. So we're going to talk about India a little bit more, but I wanted to show you that how China is very much now embedded in Iran's politics. Now, if you look at the way that China has been voting in the United Nations Security Council when it comes to Iran's politics, every time the matter comes, they are either voting abstinence during the woman life revolution, and woman life freedom revolution, they have been arguing, and they actually protected Iran from being kicked out of the Human Rights Council because they believe that Iran is a cultural things and they had the right to do that, and they actually went out of the way to protect Iran because of that. Well, of course, because there's a lot of money now invested in the country. So it actually supported the Islamic Republic in a lot of different and difficult situations, and through the nuclear voting as well. So there are, however, some obstacles on the way. So first of all, I want to emphasize that at this stage for the Islamic Republic, the survival of the regime is the most important part. So a lot of these deals that you're hearing here do not necessarily ensure the national interest of the people of Iran. In fact, makes it very difficult. So if you read any form of economic discussions about what's going to happen to any country who invests all their eggs in one basket, you can see that the dependency can be very problematic for the survival. It would be much better for Iran to have a kind of a share or a balance of investment or attract investment both from the West and the East. So there's no problem in working with the East, but had to be counterbalanced. But now Iran's economy is completely dependent on China, and a lot of times they can't actually say anything when China has a different opinion than the Islamic Republic, and that puts them into a very problematic position sometimes. Now, the most important barriers that we can see, and it has always constrained Iran and China much more than Iran and Russia's political ties, is the relationship that China has with the United States. So as you know, China is a major partner of trade with the United States, and they don't want to make a dent into that relationship. So that's one of the obstacles that stops or contains this relationship between China and Iran. China cannot forget about the sanctions. There are some international rules against investments in Iran because of the sanctions, and they don't want to jeopardize that position either. There is also a high level of tension between the Islamic Republic and most of the countries in the Persian Gulf. So it is not a very rosy and beautiful relationship. Iran and Saudi Arabia didn't talk for a while. Iran and Qatar had a little bit of problem, and now they are signing documents of cooperation. So it has been a very rocky relationship, and China doesn't want to compromise its political ties and its economic ties with other countries around Persian Gulf, because there is quite a lot of interest in that. Saudi Arabia has been very close to China. They have, if I'm correct, they have about $70 million economic deal with each other. So China doesn't want to jeopardize that. Plus that China, in fact, wants to increase its presence in the Persian Gulf, the maritime presence, because they are worried, and they know that the United States slightly has lost its interest, particularly about maritime and being present in the Persian Gulf. From the other side, when I was looking at the documents that the Islamic Republic produces, the Islamic Republic very closely monitors the relationship between other countries and China. For example, they noticed some of the problems that it created between African countries and China, the losses and the amount of debt that they have to China now. So they didn't want to be in that position. They looked at some positive relations like Russia-China relations or Saudi Arabia-China relations, but they are very warned about how to manage this relationship, not to go to a huge amount of debt. So the opportunities that a strategic cooperation between China and Iran produces for Iran is much more important than the money that Iran receives out of deals with China. So if you look at all these deals and cooperation documents, you don't see that much of a monetary value. For Iran, it's important to have a strategic cooperation. And that has opened up a new relationship between Middle East and China, because any other relationship between any other country and China is exclusively based on capital and based on monetary relations. So Iran doesn't want that. Iran wants more about a strategic position, voting for them in the United Nations Security Council, and the rest. The United States is very aware of the increasing influence of China in the Middle East. Now, I give you an example about what happened recently. So as you know, there was an attack, Houthis attacked, killed 3 American soldiers. Americans got very worried. And I know if you follow the news, the American news, you know that it is a major concern for Biden administration about how to respond to that. What do? Do you attack? Do you not attack? Do you attack the proxy forces? Do you attack Iran's land? Do you attack nuclear sites? What do you do? And one of the discussions that was interesting to me in this process was that Americans got very close to China and asked them to kind of put pressure on Iran and the Islamic Republic to stop supporting the Houthis. Now, you might find it fascinating that Chinese didn't actually respond. So they didn't say that, oh, yes, we do that, don't worry. They didn't say we don't. So it is actually staying in the ambivalence, which means that it is now putting the Biden administration into a much more difficult position, because now they don't know whether China is going to help them or not help them, and how you're going to facilitate this relationship. What it tells us is that now Iran, it's not only about the Islamic Republic and China, but now this is not a weight that United States has to deal with. And I will tell you that what they did, in addition to these particular bilateral relationships that they developed between China and Iran, Russia and Iran, India and Iran, and the rest, Iran is also becoming very boldly involved in regional organizations that do not include the United States in order to create a bloc that stops American domination, particularly dependency of Asia to US dollar. And this is going to be something that the US government needs to deal with it quite extensively. While China's relationship with Iran is political and economic, Russia's relationship with Iran is exclusively security and less economic at all. Like there is not much about money between Russia and Iran, but there is always a ping pong of relationship. So Iran dragged Russia into Syria war. Russia then dragged Iran into Ukraine. And then Iran is dragging Russia into nuclear debates. It's more about security cooperation between them and about the very strong historical relations that the Russians have, particularly with steel mills of Iran, with the steel industry in Iran. They do have that relation with India's steel industry, by the way, too. So Russia started the steel industry in both Iran and India, and that made the position of Iran and India very difficult when it came to Ukraine. Yes, so India couldn't actually stand up and take a very strong position against that because of these historical relations. So the cooperation with Iran in the last couple of years, Iran and Russia have signed about 14 different agreements. Majority of them are strategic, military, and security. Everything from nuclear facilities. If you remember, during the nuclear negotiations, Russia became responsible to get rid of all the uraniums that were used that Iran wanted to dispose of. So they got involved into that. But also it is about communication technology. Russia also teaches Iranian intelligence forces. They have a very close relationship. We know that historically, as well as now, the Iranian intelligence forces study Russian, particularly Stalin time of intelligence forces and how they operated in the prison, the torture methods, and all the others, executions, how you create fear, how you create lack of trust between people. So there's a lot of educational relationship, but this education is all about intelligence and spying. Okay, so Iranian oil company now has a contract with Russia. Iranian gas company has, national gas company has a very strong connection with Gazprom. As you know, Gazprom is run indirectly by Putin. So there is a very close connections about developing infrastructure for technology. I also know that they have been working on drones during the time that US forces were in Afghanistan. I think there are a couple of drones that they shot the drones and then they took them back and they dismantled the drones and found the map and then put them back together. So now they have a drone technology system. There's a railroad. Of course, Russia is very interested in railroads because that means that the transport of goods from the Central Asia to Turkey is much easier. As you know, Turkey plays a very significant role in this, particularly because without Turkey, there will be no energy or gas of Russia could go to Europe. All the pipelines go through Turkey. So Erdogan is also getting very interested in this. And one of the reasons that Iran and Turkey, regardless of their strategic differences, have been closer is because now Erdogan is finding that this new bloc that is forming has quite a lot of weight when it comes to energy and the flow of energy. So it's much easier for them to impact this relationship. And so, of course, we talked about the Bushehr. So Bushehr, Russians want to invest in Bushehr, Indians want to invest in Bushehr, China wants to invest in Bushehr. Everybody wants to invest in Bushehr because it's a port that is, it's an international, it can be an international port, but it's also a port next to a railroad that takes all the goods up to the Caspian Sea, and then you can take it to China or take it to Europe. So it connects these corridors of north and south and east and west. I'm sure many of you have studied and know that in the ancient Iran, actually made money out of that. So everybody who moved goods from one side of the empire to the other side of the empire, the central government said, we have nothing to do with your religion or affiliation or ethnic backgrounds or languages, whatever you want to do, as long as you give us some tax in order to move your goods, we're all good. So that's a strategy that the Islamic Republic still follows, which is interesting considering that they are so much against the ancient Persian Empire. India and Iran have a very, very different relationship. India is very connected, closely connected to the United States, has quite a lot of agreements. India also has an ambition to become part of the United Nations Security Council. They have been lobbying for that for a long time. So there's more at stake for India rather than for China and Russia, who are already a member of the United Nations Security Council. This is also important for Iran, because if Iran can have a very strong connection, the Islamic Republic can survive because it has 2 votes in the United Nations Security Council. India doesn't want to jeopardize its position, so it has much more closer alliance with the US, which means that it listens to the sanctions much more closely, doesn't increase the volume of its trade with Iran. And always it's a kind of like a relationship that you want to keep, but you don't want to get too close. So it's a cordial relationship, but it's not too close. And often India manages its political ties with Iran through regional organizations rather than through bilateral relations. 3 of them, India, Russia, and China, all 3 of them much more enjoy to have bilateral relations rather than multilateral relations. So they don't like to work through organizations, but India does. And part of the reason that it does is because it's quite tricky to have a relationship with the Islamic Republic. So if you are doing it through multipolarity, it gives you much more protection at the international level. Okay, so India is very important with Iran. Iran talks quite extensively about its historical connection with India, its artistic connection with India, how historically they were very close, and it has always been a cordial relationship between the 2 empires, the ancient empires in South Asia and in today's Middle East. India has a huge market for Iran's goods. It has a huge market, and it's in desperate need for modernization of its industries, which means that it needs energy. And if it needs energy, it needs oil and gas, and Iran is just around the corner. Now, in 2002, Iran and Pakistan and India were talking about a peace pipeline, which would go from Iran through Pakistan to India, and it would flow the natural gas. India would get a share of it, Pakistan would get a share of it. United States pressured India, India backed off and said, we're not going to be a part of this deal. Pakistan said, oh, we don't know. Iran said, I'm not going to do this until you promise me that you can do the security of this pipeline in Pakistan, because it goes through Balochistan area, and it is quite problematic in security terms. They still haven't managed it. It's on the construction. It's supposed to be about 7,000 miles of pipelines, but it decreases the cost of natural gas to India to 1/10 of what India is paying. So India is paying quite a lot of money to keep its ties with the US. And if you see, Moody has been talking quite a lot about, oh, we have an independent policy, we have an independent. Ukraine was a kind of a straw that made a little bit of rift between the United States and India, but at the same time, India still is committed to its relations and its political ties with America. So it's very difficult for India to have a stronger connection with Iran. So Iran is now the 27th. So the Iran is still does a lot of a little bit of agricultural, petrochemical materials and produce and fertilizers to India. But during the ranks, they are about 27th in the rank of relations with India. Now they are interested more because, as we're going to see very soon, they are a part of this regional organization blocks that is growing, and it is gaining momentum, and it's gaining a lot of power. And that's another matter of concern for the United States. Okay, there are three major organizations. Iran, so there's BRICS. This is British, so Brazil, Russia, China, and Iran. And Iran was very much interested to be a part of this. And then they were not accepted until 2022. In 2022, they got accepted to BRICS. It is a specific strategic alliance that wants to end the domination of the United States dollars in the world economy. Russia suggested and has been moved to moving its assets into gold, pure gold, or to Chinese currency because they don't want to be dependent on US currency. So they moved that. A lot of their assets has been changed before Ukraine even happened. They changed it to gold because they believe it's a better way to do it. China is very interested to undermine this dominance of US dollars because they want to gain momentum, and it increases their yen. So it is the increases their currencies values. And of course, Russia is very interested because Russia still has some kind of, what can I say? I'll call it Cold War hangover. So it is a Cold War hangover. They kind of still believe that they have to have a domination and they have to break this domination of US and the hegemony of the US in the region. Before the Afghanistan war started, Russians had a conversation with American forces and told them, don't get into the sand dune of Afghanistan. We got there and we sunk into those sand dunes and we couldn't come out. And that ended up into the desolation of the USSR. Americans didn't listen to them, but I think they came out giving it back to Taliban after 20 years and trillions of dollars of expenses. So maybe it's sometimes you should listen to your enemy. So the second regional cooperation, BRICS is working. So the photo that you see of, sorry, I can't. This building is the BRICS headquarters in Shanghai, and they are very much a new and coming force that are very interested to have better connections with Japan, better connection with Southeast Asia, and have a developing market in Singapore. So the money is shifting to the east, according to them, and they're very interested in doing that. The second organization, regional organization that Iran was all of a sudden accepted in was the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, Shanghai Cooperation has 8 members: it's China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Very interesting combination. And then Iran wanted to be a member of this for a very long time. They accepted Iran for 10 years to be the observer of the organization, but they didn't accept them. In 2022, Iran was accepted as a member in both BRICS and in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. To me, this is a sign that the events that happened during 2001 and 2020, 2021, and 2022 with the Ukraine's war means that they're actually doing quite a major shift. So there's a divergence, and they accepted Iran as a part of bargain. It was now we need Iran in order to be a weight in this organization because now we can develop a bloc. So there is some major activities and shifts happening in the strategic map of Asia that now gives Iran advantages that it didn't have in 2017 and in 2018. Okay, Afghanistan, Belarus, Iran, and Mongolia want to be part of it. They recently became part of it. I didn't put the photo here for you, but if you look at if you Google the online meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in 2023, you can see that the screenshot is full of gentlemen sitting on the screen. There's not even one woman in any of this organization I talked to you about. So every representative of the government that we hear this, it's a gentleman. So we're going to come back to this because I think that actually is a very important factor in the way Iran is deciding and the way the others are accepting Iran's participation. So Iran became a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That means that this is another bloc that is main focus is to stop American, they call it American hegemony in Asia. They believe that it is a way that we can create an alternative market. They're very active in different parts of the world. And interestingly, most of the South American countries now think that China, and especially China, is an alternative because before it was only America who could ask for investment. Now there is an alternative, so they are thinking about their options much more closer now, and that means that United States needs to think about an alternative strategy because those old school strategies are not necessarily as effective as they were in 1990s, even during the 2000s. The last part is non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement as an organization started during the Cold War, but it then died, and then it kind of started again. And they're also talking about American hegemony, American US dollars, the hegemony, the dominance of US dollars. We need to stop this. We need to have an alternative. So they are also functioning as a counterbalance to American power and influence in the region. Iran really wanted to send a message to say that their participation and their involvement in these organizations was a message to send to America to say that we can actually go around the sanctions. So now China is buying oil and nobody can stop China to do so because it goes through a lot of different channels and organizations and lobbying structures. Okay, the last part is that now let's see what US is going to do. So US had a plan, developed a plan at G20 meeting in September 2023. The plan was discovered and they're talking about the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. But if you look at the map of this economic corridor, it actually goes around Iran. So it comes to UAE and goes to Bahrain and goes to Qatar, goes to Saudi Arabia, goes to Israel, goes to Greece, and then goes to Europe. So it's a completely different path. India was very excited about it. They had a meeting. Mohammed bin Salman was very excited about it. But I can tell you something, there is always a danger when you have a route that has to go through 10 countries rather than a route that has to go to 2 countries, because you might be able to manage your political ties with 2 countries, but it is much more difficult between 10 countries, plus that these countries I just named, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they also have disagreements. And at any stage, one of them might say, oh, well, you can't do this in my country, and then all of a sudden the whole deal will fall apart. But everybody was very excited about it. They were supposed to develop this corridor. 40 days, just about a month after this meeting, this is September 2023, in October, 7th of October, Hamas did an attack, and then the whole language and discourse shifted, and this plan just completely became silent. So I have been looking to see whether this has gone ahead. Has anybody talked about it? The only one who's talking about it is the Minister of Business and Commerce in India, who is very excited to have also an alternative route in addition to Bushehr, because now Bushehr and Chabahar are stagnated because of the sanctions that US has put into on Iran. So Modi described the corridor as the corridor that not only connects two countries, but also connects economic cooperation, energy development, and digital connectivity between Asia, West Asia, and it will be strengthening Europe. What it meant is that they wanted to make sure that their oil relationship with Saudi Arabia was getting stronger, and that Saudi Arabia was very welcoming of this relationship. Now, the last point that I want to make, and then I open the floor for discussion, is the impacts of this pivot. So the impacts is that the first impact it has had is that it has had an impact on the US strategies towards the Middle East and Asia. I have been monitoring how the government interacts with different countries in Asia and with different countries in the Middle East, and they're way more cautious, and there is a much more slower steps towards any decision that they want to make, because now the United States can see this bloc is forming and it's becoming in power. So it's not only one country like Iran that you can just isolate, but now it is Russia, it is Iran, it is China, then India is kind of ambivalent about where to go. Southeast Asia has all sorts of relationships with Iran, including business and oil relationship. So a lot of religious schools, there's a lot of influences that Iran has in the region. The second impact is that it has increased China's involvement. China had to catch up with maritime presence in the Persian Gulf, but also with understanding Middle East very complicated politics, because it takes you a very long time. Somebody sits behind the table and say, yes, we're buddies, but you have no idea what's happening behind the scene. So China has all of a sudden become very interested and involved, and there is much more investment. If any of you would like to work, China is now putting a lot of investment in educating their people about Middle Eastern languages, Middle Eastern cultures, Middle Eastern politics, because if you want to be the new empire, you really need to know what's happening. And they never had to worry about it before, but now they have to worry about it because you have to be involved. Russia has been using Iran's like a ping pong, a bargaining chip with the United States. Islamic Republic knows that and keeps on trying to use China as a leverage with Russia. So not only that the Islamic Republic is trying to have both of them, but it's also trying to play them against each other at times. So it goes to China and says, oh, we wanted to give you this, but Russians wanted this, or they're paying more, or they have a better relationship with us. So they play this. This is also very historical in Iran. Now, the major negative impact, and I see, and one of the actual reasons for the strategic alliance is that it strengthens sexism in Middle East relations, in Asia's relations, in the politics, and you don't see women anymore. That's just a reality. You don't see them in decision making. Even in a country like India, when historically they had a very strong presence in politics, you don't see them in the decision making. In fact, they often went and supported Islamic Republic's misogynistic politics in international forums. So that sexism is attractive to them. And I have evidence for every single one of them to show you that how the fact that Iran is very, like Islamic Republic, is very overtly misogynistic, it boldens them to be sexist. And it gives them the opportunity to do so, and they use that. Violation of human rights, of course, you know, some countries in the West have very strong position about human rights. They criticize the Islamic republics and Middle Eastern countries about human rights. That issue is no longer a matter of concern for Islamic Republic because neither China nor Russia are particularly interested in human rights or criticize any country for human rights. China very publicly offers this idea that, oh, we just want to have deals and we just want to have economic relations. Your internal affairs have nothing to do with us, but very comfortably goes and defends the Islamic Republic in the Committee Against the Violations of Human Rights. there is a new definition for non-interference, and this is my academic solution to that. Non-interference doesn't necessarily mean that traditional liberal definition of non-interference. It means that selective non-interference. So if you're killing your own people, I don't care about what you're doing, but I can interfere in the way that you are dealing with the international community and save you when you're in trouble. So I interfere when it is to my benefit, but I don't interfere when it has nothing to my interests are protected. It has strengthened totalitarianism. There is a growth of totalitarian politics across Asia. Southeast Asia is dealing with that. South Asia is dealing with that. Middle East is dealing with that. And the emboldening of Iran saying that totalitarianism is a cultural heritage of us to the international community means that all of a sudden everybody else says, oh, yeah, we have that too. Like, we put somebody here to tell everybody how to deal with that. And Iran's economy is now, as I mentioned before, is completely dependent on China and Russia and their foreign policies, which puts them into much danger because at the end of the day, if Russia's interests are targeted or China's interests are targeted, the volume of trade are not necessarily that high for them. And Iran now has paid a very heavy price for this because now it has lost a lot of relations and a lot of foreign policy ties with other different countries because of this pivot that it has made since 2005 and has increased since 2015. So thank you very much for listening to me. It was great to talk to you, and I'm really ready for discussions. Thank you.
Okay.
So we can start here with the live audience, but we also have questions online. So we'll start here if anyone has it before we turn to.
For me, Iranian, Islamic Revolution had two major ideological elements. It was against dictatorship. It was democratic. At the same time, it was anti-imperialist. These were two major elements which legitimized the revolution. The self-description of the regime came into existence. The first one was very clear that Iranians, including intellectuals, made a revolution in order to destroy authoritarian politics. What they replaced was 10 times more authoritarian, 10 times more anti-democratic. So for me, it's a comparison of sort of art and Napoleon III, which first is tragedy, the second one is comic. Makes much more sense that the Islamic Revolution, as compared, for instance, constitutional revolution, is a comic. I mean, it said that it was great democracy, and of course, it created one of the most repressive regimes of the world. But the other element that is almost clear, everybody agrees. But the other element, I was fascinated. The details discussion was very comprehensive, very informative. And for me, the overall implications of that is the same thing. Namely, Iran engages in a revolution in order to reject imperialism, as you said, neither the West, the East. But then by demonization, a total reduction of the West to evil. What it did was it became essence of imperialism, either to become voluntarily controlled by imperialistic forces of China, Russia. It talks on colonialism of Gaza. At the same time, sending drones to destroy Ukraine. The hypocrisy of this slaughter. And at the same time, of course, Iran's policy from the very beginning was an imperialistic policy for creating a Shia controlled Islamic community base and so on. So I want you to comment about this impression that for me, just exactly like it's the democratic dimension, the anti-imperialistic dimension also was a pure meaningless slogan, which became exactly the exact opposite. At least during the time of the Shah, increasingly he was creating balance between the East and the West. And so the normal idea that it was just a puppet of the West and so on, of course, was not real. But the Islamic Revolution has moved in a direction that, again, for me, that concept of comic defines it.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of with most of what you said. My comment is that the revolutionaries of 1978 didn't really listen to Khomeini. Khomeini was very clear. He never said, I'm going to have democratic system. He said, we have to replace the crowns with an amama, with a turban. Like he believed, he had a Platonic idea of the king philosopher. And he believed that this should be the person who is the Ayatollah philosopher. He believed that so he never actually talked about decentralization of power. He believed that the person who is ruling and is at the top of this pyramid of power shouldn't be the Shah, who is secular. It should be an Ayatollah who is just and this and that. But because at the time, and I do have some theories about why it happened, because at the time the discourse of anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism was very dominant in the world. It was in South America, it was everywhere. It kind of united a lot of different forces, including Mujahideen and the communists and the Islamists together. But nobody actually listened to that. Plus that he had a very, very strong moral position, a misogynistic moral position, and he talks about that. Oh, we should bring women back to the straight path, and the Shah wants to kind of take a woman and make them astray, so they wear short skirts and things. And I believe that also united a lot of different forces, because if you look at the uniform that, for example, the communist girls would wear during the revolutionary times of 1976 to 1978 is very similar to the Mujahideen. It just doesn't have the spouse, but it's very similar. Most of them, they were very fascinated by Mao's style of uniform in China. So they believe that sexualization of women, makeups, femininity, these are all problems. And that also united. So they united these forces, but they didn't really listen. If you look at the comments of the new generation of revolutionaries who fought in woman life freedom revolution, they all are very surprised at how intellectuals of Iran actually believe that this man is going to bring democracy. How would you believe that somebody who believes that the central power should be in the hand of an Ayatollah can actually democratize Iran? So that's absolutely true. I also completely agree with you. I think Iran has always had, there's an element of imperialistic tendencies in Iranian cultures that has always been, and it has never died, whether it is Shah who's standing there and say, I am the gendarme and the police of the region, and I don't know, I put the oil and bottle of Coca-Cola and I sell it to people. That was what he said in 1974. And whether it is that, or whether after that, when Khomeini said, oh, we're going to do a halal Shi'i, which is like the Shia crescent, and bring everybody together, even with the communist revolutionaries who believe that we all have to be united under this banner of revolution because it was the revolution of the oppressed, but who runs it? Iranians. So there is that imperialistic narrative that kind of persuades and goes to that. So I completely agree with you. But I think at this stage we are talking about it is the fear of losing legitimacy and losing the regime that pushes them to this increasingly more pivot to the east and dependency on Russia and China.
Let me ask a question from the chat, and then we'll come back here. This is from Professor Choksi. What are Iran's long-term, say 10 to 20-year goals through turning eastward, and are those goals achievable?
Very, very great question. So in 10, 20 years, Iran believes that the goal is to create a bloc, and this bloc is supposed to be combining of Russia, China, Iran, hopefully India. This is Iran's dream. This is the Islamic Republic's dream. And India and the rest in order to be counterbalancing the Americans' hegemony and actually creating a new world order. In the last Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, that was what Raisi said in the meeting, and he said that we want to create a new world order in which the United States is no more the dominant or the hegemon of the world. So that's their main goal. Is this achievable? I don't think that Iran's intentions really matters in the success of such a bloc or not. But I believe that in the last 3 years, particularly after Ukraine, you can see a much more closeness between China and Russia, and to a degree with China, Russia, and India. So whether the United States will be able to develop a strategy that breaks these alliances, no, it won't be achievable. If they are not able to do so and it continues, yes, there might be.
Michael.
I was wondering if these foreign policy moves and foreign economic moves require any ideological acrobatics on the part of the regime. Do they try to justify working with, the godless Chinese or the Christian Russians? Do they talk about it? Do people accept it because the main enemy is the US and that's who they need to counteract?
Yeah. So I think that people are completely irrelevant to the Islamic Republic. Like they don't really care whether people do that or not. This is not even because of the interest of people. This is only because they want to survive. So that's one thing. But Iran has started in 80s and 90s to be very ideological. You can see it in Central Asia. They were very careful about China, the godless China, Russians, communist Russians. But as they moved into history, they became more and more pragmatic. So in 2015, they sat behind the table with the United States and signed an agreement. They were very happy to do so. Even in 1997, during Khatami's first round, Clinton and Khatami started to send messages to each other, and they were very happy. Iran sent message that we can do something with Hezbollah if you like to talk to us. They were very pragmatic in that regard. I don't think, even now, as we're speaking, I don't think that if America goes with a very good deal to Iran, Iran would say no. But the problem is that the hostage crisis are still very well alive in the American administration, ideological. So they both have an ideological position. At the moment, Iran's ideological position is benefiting them because they can get closer to Russia and China. But China moves economically and becomes more and more developed, it might be more difficult to keep China in that bloc because your middle class wants more advantages and money and cars and better jobs. So it becomes a little bit more difficult to keep China in that mold unless United States has a tendency or has an ambition to hurt Chinese interests in the Middle East. And then you can see this progress. So to a degree, America, United States plays still a major part in this. But I don't believe, I think anything will be more compromised. There is a very good book that Mousavi wrote, who was the ambassador of Iran in the United Nations. And his argument was that there's a fight in Iran between Khamenei and every president that comes into power. Because if there is any deal with America, Khamenei wants to be the one who makes this deal, and then not the presidents. And that has always been a problem between reformists. He got rid of reformists because of that. The central right wings are also excluded exactly because of that, because Rouhani even wanted to have a relationship with the US. So yes, there is a love and hate relationship between United States and Iran.
I'd like to know your opinion about the US and Iran relationship. As you know, I mean, Iran is like October nowadays. It is in Iraq, it is in Yemen, it is in Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine, lastly. So the proxies always hit each other. So do you expect any direct clash between United States and Iran? I mean, last week, 3 soldiers were killed, and Iran saying, okay, it is not us, but I mean, it's clear. What do you think? I mean,
That's a very good question, and I think this is the question that Biden administration is asking itself now. What should we do? Should we attack? So there are options. Should we attack proxies, like Houthis in Yemen? But which one of the proxies are you going to attack? Hashd al-Shaabi, Houthis, Hezbollah, one faction of Hamas. Now, who are you going to attack? And who can guarantee that if you attack, for example, Houthis, Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq is not going to cause trouble? Because part of the fact that you do have proxy forces is because when you are in trouble, they come in and help. Yes. So that's a major issue. Plus that we now know that Iran, the Islamic Republic, I must say, the Islamic Republic has a strong influence in one part of Taliban as well. So the Taliban who are in the borders with Iran are by Iran. So a lot of them, so now you have Taliban who can cause trouble in Afghanistan. So that's one option, is to attack the proxy forces. The second option is to attack Iran. And then if you want to attack Iran, how are you going to attack Iran? You're going to go in and blow something up and come out? You're going to put military forces on Iraq, make another Iraq, make another Afghanistan. I don't think that American public would like that. I don't think there is that much of a will or tendency for that. So Biden administration
doesn't have the guts to do that either.
and that's another issue. Even during Trump, I mean, what Trump did is that he just went to kill Soleimani and came back, and they were like, and then Iran said, okay, we're going to do something, but we make sure that you're not going to be hurt. This has domestic impact. We just want to tell our people that we did something against America. We responded to America, which is aggression.
That's very interesting, because the United States said we told Iran about the Kirman bombing, which was bombed by ISIS. So what's going on? I mean, how the United States tell Iran ISIS is going to bomb you? So.
And what did Iran do? Nothing. They just said, oh yeah, okay. So we go on with our ceremony, and they killed 200 people, yes. So there is I think actually this is one of the biggest questions of foreign policy and then, as I talked, what's going to happen? China's going to come in, Russia's going to do something, Iran is no longer this isolated island, seventh in the region. They are sitting on 7% of Iran of the world's oil and gas resources. How are you gonna do that? So this is Iran is neither Afghanistan nor Iraq, it's gonna be way more complicated to do that. And even if you go inside Iran and bombard the hell out of them and come out, you still are gonna get stuck in it for 20 years at least. So yes, very difficult. If you ask me, and don't quote me on that, I was thinking yesterday, if I was Biden administration, I would go and bombard the hell out of Bush and nuclear power plant and I come back. And you don't have to worry about nuclear Iran anymore. But even that is the problem, but the Natanz are still working. Yes. Very, very difficult. Yeah.
So I have a question. You talked a little bit about Pakistan. I thought it was interesting that you said it would be easier to deal. India's calculation was it would be easier to deal with 2 countries rather than 10. It's very hard for India to deal with Pakistan, but
Yes.
that's neither here nor there. In the past few days, tensions between Iran and Pakistan have really escalated. So could you talk a little bit about what that escalation is about and what the international relations consequences of those tensions are?
So the particular problem that Iran and Pakistan had, to me, was Iran's legitimacy issue. So Islamic Republic is really struggling with domestic legitimacy. They can't put hijab on women's head. There's constantly a problem. Every day there's something. People dance in the streets to mock them. Every time they pass policies, they have to go back and say, "Oh, the policy didn't work, so we do it again." Every week there's a turban tossing competitions between youngsters in Iran that they follow a mullah and they just turban toss their turban. So there's a lot of legitimacy issues, and the only way that they can sustain their power is 2 ways. One is to have a war. So there's a faction in Iran who wants a war, and maybe Pakistan is an easy pick. So maybe because Pakistan has a very strong military force, but at the same time, and nuclear weapons. So it's not very easy, but Pakistan would hesitate to put all its forces against Iran because they always have to keep an eye on India. So Iran maybe calculated that. That's kind of one reason. But last year they wanted to have a fight with Taliban. It didn't work. So part of the region is that. So what they do is that since the woman life freedom movement, there is a very close unity between different ethnic groups in Iran that they have been successful of intentionally separating them for the last 40 years. And then all of a sudden, everybody in Iran understood that, oh, the main problem is our separation in the Islamic Republic. It's not actually us. So what they do is that they target the Baluch and the Kurds. They executed 4 young Kurds as well. So they target the Baluch and the Kurds. So to tell them that, to say, you see, the people in Tehran don't really care about what's happening to you. So it is not about you. It is about your elites or university students who do that. And then they create distrust, and when you divide and conquer. So I think that's one of the reasons. Now, both Iran and Pakistan have struggled with armed Baluchi militia. So there was a kind of like, to me, it kind of looked like, oh, okay, so we come and do something, and then you come and do something. So Iran went inside the borders of Pakistan and bombarded the group that they claimed to be armed against Iran. And then Pakistan came, which is Jaish al-Aq, which is the Baluchi forces. Then Pakistan came into Iran's border and bombarded the Baluchi group who are armed against Pakistan. And it's kind of like a ping pong playing games that they do. Iran does exactly the same thing with different countries, including Iraq and Turkey. So there's not always like, I get rid of your enemy, you get rid of my, it's kind of like works. So I think that was what happened, but I also believe that Iran is a major portion of Revolutionary Guards and Khamenei, they all want a war. It's a good opportunity. In 1980s, it kept them in power for 40 years. It allowed them to slaughter tens of thousands of people in prison, subjugate women, like all sorts of a range of benefits. So I think that's also a part of it. They wouldn't mind if somebody gets into a war with them.
Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. I'd like to thank you all again for coming. Thank you to those of you who joined us online, and most of all, thanks to our speaker, Dr. Partaw. We can give her a more round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you.
Sarah, will you get the